Good evening. This is going to be your late night fireside chat update. For those of you that are in the midnight watch, and I know some of you are in the midnight watch, and those of you that are waking up in the morning, this will hopefully be encouraging update because we are seeing one of the most fascinating resets and battles being worked out. There's three states that right now are top and really should be focused on. If you're looking at prayer, we've been praying that every hidden work of darkness will be exposed. We knew that this election was going to be literally the most crucial election of our lifetime. And we understand that the prayer is going up in such volume that one has to wonder if we are delusional for our hope that 70 million people or more who voted for Donald Trump are to just be swept aside by the power of just two forces right now, media and the Democratic Party. The good news is the media has suffered so much credibility loss over such a long period of time that the majority of you aren't affected by it. And you have to stay unaffected by it because we're in information warfare right now. And what the devil would love to do is to overwhelm the perseverance and resolve of the pursuit of truth in a blizzard of what's wrong with you? How could you possibly be holding out? You're crazy, and how could you be believing these things? Well, I'll tell you what's very interesting about this. The Lord is at work right now to expose the corruption, and it's very important that this happens. It's kind of like deep state, because so much of what has happened since Trump became president, from my perspective, is a Christian civics education. None of us really understood the mechanisms of government. We never really didn't understand, and we prefer the superficial, pray and it all gets fixed and life goes on, kind of like a made-for-TV movie where everything gets resolved, and it gets resolved with a happy ending. But this is a battle for the world order right now, and the good news is that Christians are praying all over the world right now. So here's what we have. Matter of fact, let me give you one of the updates, which I think is important, because Rudy has been doing some incredible stuff as he and Bannon are here discussing. I want you to catch this particular update.
Our next guest is going to be Dave Coleman from, I think, the Great Lakes. He's one of these public interest research institutions. This lawsuit is a combination of what Thor was working on in Coleman. Is that correct, in Michigan?
Correct.
Hope you can hear it.
And they both have superior information. Thor has the part of it with the government insiders who basically are turning, let's call it state's evidence. They are Democrats who are testifying against the Democratic effort because they were so disgusted.
Imagine that.
Basically, Thor's people. Coleman has the community people, and he's got the Dominion people. And they were the ones who were the actual, not the poll watchers, the observers, who were excluded, who were lied to, but two of whom stayed behind after all the Republicans had been left out. And they're the ones who got the evidence on the 100,000 votes coming in. And they have some photographs also. You put those two together, and you've got some very, very powerful evidence that room at the Cobb Center, I think it was a complete, let's make up the votes room. How much do we have to make up, and let's get there?
So what I want you to catch is that the Dominion software they're talking about is an interesting piece of software. It's a software which they found was already defective with 5,000 votes inaccurately going to a Democrat where they should have gone to a Republican. But the Dominion software has been undergoing some tremendous scrutiny because this has been used in like some 30 states. And there's a 300-page user manual that goes with it. And that complex software actually has the ability to be manipulated. So that, for instance, if you were to if you were to put in the word Republican, they could have it set so that the L and the I might be transposed in such a way that it will reject a vote that would go Republican. So in every place where the Dominion software has been used, now there's this rapid forensic going on. And fortunately, one of the former Google employees, who's a bit of a maven on this, is the one who is doing the expose on the complexity and manipulation of the code, which always was a bother for me, because 2 years ago I was in a special briefing where they were talking about how the only IT people that have control over this software in these polling places is, for instance, in Michigan, it was a Democrat, partisan Democrat, who was the one who would calibrate or fix the machines. Now, they shouldn't be touched once the election starts, but you see, they can be reset. They can be, because they work off of on a wireless basis. And so there's that area alone is one we need to pray into. That's why I'm bringing it up to you, because what we have to find isn't just individual instances, of which are abounding, of vote errors, irregularities, or outright fraud. There has to be enough in sufficient number to be able to overturn the results. So to give you an idea where that's at, in Pennsylvania, it's the largest margin. It's 53,000 votes. But in Pennsylvania, they have a special problem, because the state Supreme Court decided that they were going to accept votes coming in after the election. And that decision was actually overruled by Justice Alito in the Supreme Court, but ignored. And so it's estimated that anywhere from 400,000 to 600,000 votes were accepted, that came after the polls closed, which means that essentially they have to make a decision in the Supreme Court as to what to do with those votes. Now, in Philadelphia, for instance, they separated the envelopes from some 100,000 questionable votes, which means that you can't verify accurately the origin of the vote and be able to do the matching that's necessary. So those anomalies are going to create a problem for Pennsylvania in terms of how, if the Supreme Court, for instance, with Amy Coney Barrett on it, now is in a position to say, well, wait a second, the courts do not have authority over the votes. It's the state legislature. And this is where I say the civics lesson is so interesting for all of us, because the state legislatures are the ones who have authority over the votes, and the founders set it up for this reason. When the states decided to come together and be a united, states, one of the safeguards they had was that the states themselves would certify the elections for the president, and it wouldn't be controlled by the federal government, that each state would have a legislature which would be able to represent itself. They wanted those checks and balances. And so that is written in to our very system of government, so that it's going to be a constitutional issue as to whether or not a court, which is how the left does things, if they can't win things by voting, popular vote, then they get them by activist judges in courts. One way or the other, they have to have their way. And so the problem that they have with this is that it violates the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, I think it's Section 4, which authorizes the state legislators alone to be able to certify election results, and they can't be overruled by a court in their state. So that alone may cause those 400 some odd thousand ballots that came in late to what do they do with that? What do they do with those? They were supposed to be segregated or separated until a decision could be made, and now with the courts with a conservative majority, it's likely that decision is going to actually is going to remove that 40,000 vote, 53,000 vote advantage that Biden had, and we don't know how many of those votes are actually valid votes either. So there has to be a process for looking at that. But it's quite likely that those 20 electoral votes are going to go to Trump for Pennsylvania, which is the Keystone State, which is it's the city of our founding, Philadelphia. And so it's a most prophetically interesting kind of dilemma to have when Pennsylvania is the key to this. Now, going to Georgia, there's a whole different problem. The number of votes that separate Biden and Trump is only 14,000. But here again, we have incredible voting irregularities. We put a couple of thousand people into polls. You guys did that. I made a call and said you guys need to be poll watchers, and so many of you, for the first time, just went out. But unlike the Democrats, who are all trained to do this, the Republicans weren't really trained in how to do this poll watching in terms of the aggressiveness of the way that the Democrats would push back the observers so that they didn't have the ability to see what was going on. And in particular, we have in Atlanta, when we went to go put people in to Georgia, we found that the Democrats had already filled their quota within 48 hours of 10,000 poll watchers because they were so well organized. They were just ready with their mailing list to say, Democrats do it. And so so we couldn't even get people in many of these places. Nevertheless, we had thousands that were delivering now evidence and reports to the proper authorities, Michigan, Wisconsin, etc. So Georgia is going to have a vote-by-vote recount. That's going to be literally every one of them. It's going to be rehandled. It's a nail-biter for the Democrats because they just want us to go to bed and give them power. But Pennsylvania could easily be overturned for the reasons I gave you. Georgia, with that 14,000 vote gap, is now up for a complete forensic, and it'll be interesting to see how that comes out. Wisconsin is the third place that we're looking right now for these voting irregularities. There's a 20,000 vote gap between Biden and Trump. And as you know, all of these it's kind of like the Bible says in the parable of the tares and the wheat. While men slept, an enemy came in and sowed tares among the wheat. And while we slept from 1 o'clock in the morning until we got up at whatever time we got up the next day, you found that Pennsylvania, Trump's 500,000 vote advantage was evaporating. Wisconsin, Georgia, etc. And that was because, from my perspective, the Democrats had to come up with sufficient infusions of ballots, etc., in order to make up the gap, what they were losing. Now, what to do with those, because many of those could just be brought in, and how do we identify which ones were brought in? It's not as easy as in Pennsylvania, we do know, because they had a very specific law given to them by Alito. Now, but with Wisconsin, the good news is that there are 3 or 4 specific counties which are statistically total anomalies, meaning that the number of votes that came out with Obama and with Hillary, you get a certain number. You get a certain number that comes out. Biden was not exactly the candidate that everybody couldn't wait to go vote for. So it wasn't like there was this reason to have to vote, but we have these, I think it's 3 to 5 counties where it's double-digit increase in voter turnout that happened. And once again, we have this midnight till 8 a.m. phenomena. We're looking at where do they come from. In that case also, what we are looking at is the possibility of when you have twice as many votes coming in from a county that doesn't have any enthusiasm for a candidate, and it's higher than their statistical average, that's called ballot stuffing. That means you had more than one vote that came out, and more than one vote being counted. And so there's a very strong possibility that you're going to see Wisconsin with its 20,000 votes challenged. And now and we have to be really, sober about this. This is David and Goliath stuff. It's not an easy thing, because typically when these votes are redone, you may come up with 700 or 1,000 or 2,000. What we're looking for is evidence of wide-scale voter fraud that would lead to the 20,000 votes that are going to be challenged in that margin between Trump and Biden in Wisconsin. Michigan is probably the worst of all, and what's interesting about Michigan is we can't go into these states once again, because the states are set up as to be their own guardians, so that the state legislator, the mayors, the governors, in Michigan, they're all Democrat. So they're just locking shields on whatever shenanigans was going on. However, there's evidence that William Barr has seen that he referred to, and he didn't cite specifically which case, but it caused him at the DOJ to say, no, now the federal government does step in if there is criminal activity of some sort. And so that the federal government has to really respect the state's process unless there's evidence of wrongdoing. So now with Barr in there, it'll be interesting to see what comes out, if anything, in Michigan that makes that a subject of controversy that's going to be coming up. But even if with Trump has, with his 217 votes right now, if he has the 16 from Georgia, the 20 from PA, the 10 from Wisconsin, and I'm not sure about Arizona. I mean, we're going to continue to, obviously we're praying, and the folks that are in Arizona have every reason to continue the battle. The gap there is another challenge in terms of being able to prove where the corruption is in terms of the voting process, being able to have sufficient evidence that could result in narrowing of that gap. However, even without Arizona, it's the Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin that suddenly the impact of that on Biden and the impact of that for the president moves the electoral distribution to something like 249 or something with Biden, 263 for Trump. I mean, there'll be widespread meltdown all over the country at that point because, you see, you don't have a 270 winner. And as I understand it, this evokes other constitutional things that the founders were so brilliant in putting in, because they had a total distrust of human nature, and they understood how power wants to take control. So they're in their checks and balances. They set it up so that in the event that you have insufficient electoral votes to certify a president, that then it goes to the House, and the House doesn't vote based on how many congressmen you've got. It goes with every state gets one vote. And if every state gets one vote, then the state legislators that are dominated by Republicans outnumber the Democrats in the United States, and that's where all that red flyover country pays off, because the coastal concentration of power in New York, L.A., and down in Atlanta, and et cetera, that is compensated for by the red state phenomena. And so in that case, then Trump would be elected as a result of the House. And so many people have been saying, as I said, that I felt that the Supreme Court's going to play a decisive role in this. And I didn't even understand the complexity of how this works. It's just something I wrote in my book, that Trump would win, that the win would be eroded by illegal votes, that the news media would do a freeze, and that the courts were going to have to intervene. This is all like on page 71 of my book. And I think it was on page 123 I said, and we're going to experience the hijacking of the presidential election, because it'll be like box cutters carving their way down in an airplane to get into the cockpit. The secret is, don't let the plane leave the runway. Don't let the media make it launch, because we can't afford to have 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years of, and as I said before, Joe Biden will not survive the expose on the hard drive, and we don't want President Harris, because that would be even worse. So we really are in a place where we have to see God move in this situation. Does that make sense to you all so far, everything I'm saying? Now I want to give you some so it's all encouraging, because even though it's 3 Hail Marys, this is touchdown Trump, and it's actually doable because of the fraud and because of the insubordination, particularly in Pennsylvania, of what they did with the extra 400,000 or so on votes. The evidence that Giuliani's talking about with the Dominion software is a game changer, especially if people come out and they say, hey, this isn't right. I mean, because there are people that are Democrats that voted for Trump, and there are, oddly enough, there's like 11% of evangelicals voted, I think 15% for the Democrats. But what we have here that's very interesting is the fact that there are Democrats who are saying, well, wait a second, my wife's a Republican, or maybe I kind of like Trump, I didn't like him, but but I don't like what I'm seeing, because they will not be a party to what they believe is illegality. So we got to continue to pray for the courage of those whistleblowers, because trust me, there's such intimidation factor that goes on in these Democrat-controlled cities and counties. The union and the BLM activists, particularly in Michigan, were a real problem for some of our folks that we have working in the polls, in terms of their intimidation and the way that they dominated. But I got something else that I thought was really important. I want to give it to you tonight. I want to give this like breaking news. Donald Trump fired someone, and he did it with a tweet, which is elegant. And he took the defense secretary, Mark Esper, and everybody's trying to figure out, why did he fire the defense secretary? Well, he fired the defense secretary, and he wrote in his tweet, "Mark Esper has been terminated. I would like to thank him for his service." He's a deep state Pentagon general who took Mattis's place when Mattis disagreed with Trump about removing troops from, I think it was Syria, getting our troops out and home. And then Trump went on to say, this is so fascinating, Christopher Miller, director of National Counterterrorism Center. Notice, he's putting in the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And I'm going to tell you why in a second. He's going to serve as acting secretary, sidestepping the department's number 2 ranking official. Normally you have the number 2 guy go, but the number 2 guy I don't think was loyal to Trump. And that would have been, the Deputy Defense Secretary David Norquist, I think. But the Mark Meadows, who's the chief of staff, informed Esper gave him a call before the tweet went out, so he wasn't totally shocked that Trump fired him with a tweet. How classic, the boss just fired him off. And of course the Pentagon had a meltdown, because they're all politicians and deep state people out there, sorry to say, so many of them. But this guy, Christopher Miller, was special forces. He's combat. He's a national counterterrorism. And having a special forces background and being loyal to Trump, why would Trump want him in office? Well, it's because Mark Esper exposed himself, and I did a firewall revealing this. When Donald Trump went to the arson-burned church, St. John's Church in Washington, and he went over there as Antifa, BLM, and the activists were burning everything down and raising hell and pulling over statues and doing their revolutionary protest, Trump went over and held up a Bible, and Mark Esper was offended that he was brought along with Barr and other people who Trump thought that it was his staff. Let's go over there and survey the damage. Let's make a statement that we're standing for the side of law and order, and we're standing with the church when it's being burned down. And Esper right away goes and has a press conference and starts to make clear the fact that no matter how bad the rioting gets, in his opinion, it's not bad enough to justify the president giving him an order for the exercise of the Alien Sedition Act, which is when there is militia, anarchy, and rioting and destruction, the military can go in to protect the citizens. And he said, no, I would not support that. And Trump made a note of that and said, you're fired. And it just was a matter of time. Now, why is it that he wants him fired? Well, because if Trump picks up Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, all of that rioting we were expecting suddenly is back on the menu, because, as you can see, conservatives really riot all the time, don't they, when they're ripped off. Now, we're law-abiding, so 70 million people aren't burning anything. But the moment that it looks as though this thing's going to reverse, and that the coronation of Absalom isn't going to happen, that David's back on the throne, then you're going to see the unleashing of hell in the cities. And I'm telling you ahead of time, Mark Esper was fired because Donald Trump will have Christopher Miller, the director of national counterterrorism, go in, and he's working with Barr and the loyal FBI people in order to identify the terrorism cells that are actually working to riot in the inner cities. And it's going to be treated as a terrorism military confrontation. It'll be very interesting. So I'm telling you guys, you heard the news here first, folks. This is like, the kind of stuff you get. And if you were, I don't do QAnon, but that's like a QAnon news break. But so that's going to be, it's fascinating. They put Christopher Miller in charge for the intervention of the military with the backlash of the deep state, which will go crazy and ballistic if their corrupt Democrat Party media coup fails, which we're praying desperately is what happens. Meanwhile, what's coming up next is Christopher Wray. He's done, but we have to wait for the right time. He's the director of the FBI who sat on the Hunter Biden, hard drive, had evidence that really probably could have saved the president the whole impeachment scenario. Because remember, the president said, "I think there's shenanigans going on with Hunter Biden and Ukraine and China," and Giuliani had the goods on that. But he was impeached because that was too big an insult to the control on the left that he would dare expose how they make a living there in Washington. That's my opinion on that. But so now we're finding out that the evidence was there, and the FBI actually had it for 9 months to a year and wasn't even talking about it. So Christopher Wray will be fired. Just remember, I predicted that one. And it's just, all right now, I think Christopher Wray would be doing a good job if he would try to redeem himself by the FBI coming in and helping with this fraud situation and doing their job instead of that. Now, some of the people that are turning whistleblowers, it's really irritating. Sidney Powell was talking about this, that they're under so much pressure from the postal, deep state that is trying to get, trying to intimidate them, and how, you're saying there's anomalies, and there was, something involving the post office, and so some of those whistleblowers have actually been under interrogation over coming in, but they're not going to break, because I really believe that they're there for this moment. So here you go. You're looking at history as it's unfolding, and it's so fascinating. In Georgia, I think one of the oddest things that they found that's going to be coming out is 27,000 votes. Remember, there's what did I say? The gap there is 14,000. Well, here's they're going to have, Democrats are really freaking out over this one. 27,000 people who voted are over 90 years old. 2,000 of them are over 100, and 500 of the voters were over 105. And so this is, and 2,500 weren't even registered in Georgia who voted in Georgia. So that's, you're talking like 30,000 votes right there. We're only looking for 14,000. And we're gonna, all that stuff's about to come out. We have to be patient, because it's Trump's running the clock. Don't forget, Biden can always protest this. But what Trump is doing is very thoroughly, I believe, laying the case out and going for the recount and recanvassing and those votes and buying time, because Biden doesn't have a big window to be able to counteract. And trust me, the left is freaking out over this. They just think, we're crazy. How could you possibly say this? Well, they don't even question the integrity of their victory. So that's what makes them so vulnerable. Now, today, on this day, as I'm concluding, is an important covenant day, spiritually, a very powerful day, because today is the day in which people are celebrating and recognizing the original founding of America. This is the Mayflower landing. The Mayflower, as you remember, the Pilgrims arriving at Plymouth Rock. And I have a really powerful article. You guys want to read this. Is the Claremont Review of Books. It's quite a great in-depth kind of summary of books that are out there. But I want to read this to you, because I want to talk to you for a moment about the actual Mayflower Compact, Covenant, because this is the founding of America. In the book, God's Chaos Code, I said Israel and God and Trump's faithfulness to Israel is a factor that we're cashing in on, in a sense, for the mercy of God and intervention and the angelic warfare. People made fun of me, but this is a biblical reality. I mean, Daniel talked about principalities, 21 days of contest with the Prince of Persia, Gabriel and his battalions engaging, and then Michael came. And Michael in particular is assigned over Israel. And you've seen so much progress made with Israel, from the Golan Heights to the killing of Soleimani, the greatest threat, to the peace of 5 nations already making peace with Israel. And Donald Trump is sowed into all this with the embassy move that nobody would ever agree to, but he did it anyway. And so I really believe that these things all matter. But this covenant, we're fighting for the covenant of America. I don't think America deserves the degree of blessing and freedom that we have, but we have it. And while we have it, we should be thanking God for this mercy. And of course, you've got these disgraceful New York Times projects that's trying to undo the whole American story of history, so as to make America just one big evil empire of sadistic racist. And this is what our children have all been taught. So let me give you something about the Pilgrim settlement real quick. Just over 100 people landed in Plymouth on December 22nd, 1620. That's when they landed. Then they came on shore and they made their compact and all that stuff. That's what's celebrated today as the day. Technically, it's actually the 21st, but today is the day that is being recognized. Most of the pilgrims who came here were actually coming for religious reasons. There were some there that were obviously there were opportunists, and they were what they called strangers. They were just godless. But the majority of them were Christians that were seeking a new place where they could worship God in a new land. They were that desperate to have community and family and to have the freedoms that we have, that they were in exile in Leiden for a decade, for like over 10 years, because they wouldn't compromise with what they believe was the corruption in the Church of England. And so they came over here, and let me just read to you. To minimize strife, the men who had signed the Mayflower Compact before stepping on shore pledged to honor individually all the laws. They created their first government, self-government of a Christian people landing in a foreign land. And that is an amazing thing that they convinced the people that were godless that we really do have to have an agreement as to how we're going to live together as a community. And they came to an agreement as what that would be. Alone, freezing, poorly provisioned. Half of those pilgrims that came, this is shocking, they died. They died the first year. They died of starvation and of diseases in the very first severe winter. And they landed in December. Unfortunate, bad timing on that one. And however, one day, Samoset, a chief of the Abenaki Indians in what is now Maine, walked into Plymouth and addressed the settlers in English. And he introduced the pilgrims to Massasoit, who was chief of the region's Wampanoag Indians, and to Squanto, a second English speaker. Massasoit, who lived just west of the pilgrims in the settlement of Polkanocket, offered food. Squanto offered planting and fishing advice. Most important, the two sides agreed to a common defense pact. They realized that they should be working together because they were in an area where both of them could be threatened by hostiles. In the autumn of 1621, the Pilgrims and the Pokanoket Wampanoags shared a giant feast, and that's what we call Thanksgiving. And this is really a beautiful thing. This is a remarkable moment in history here. That they were grateful is not surprising. Against the backdrop of the early 17th century, the Pilgrims' bond with the Wampanoags was atypical to the point of being mystifying, because this wasn't the relationship of the Native Americans with English settlers. For instance, in other places, encounters between Indians and Europeans were hostile, as when fishermen landed to trade, that most often ended in violence. 2 years after the Pilgrims landed, for instance, the Powhatan Indians slaughtered 347 colonists in Jamestown. All over the New World, there have been stories like this, and so the fact that these Pilgrims were able to strike a covenant, and that they actually had met Native Americans who were willing to form an alliance with them, is the beautiful kiss of God in a moment of history that is the genesis of America. The real America was birthed then. And they had been how the Indians learned to speak English is because they were abducted by I believe it was Spanish and Portuguese traders who came over and abducted them to make them slaves, and they had learned a bit of English, enough English, and then escaped, so that they were able to communicate with these Pilgrims when they got there. It's really quite an incredible story. Let me just read you one more thing here that I think is so important, because the 1619 project that we've got in the New York Times that wants to make America all evil skips over this particular story, and this is the covenant story that our roots are in. What was unique about the Pilgrims, even among the English settlers of their time, is that they came for love of God. They didn't come like everybody else was coming from money. And from Columbus's voyages until the settlement of Virginia, explorers and exploiters had taken great risks, but always for their own enrichment. It was reserved for the first settlers of New England, said John Quincy Adams, to perform achievements equally arduous, to trample down obstructions equally formidable, to dispel dangers equally terrific under the single inspiration of conscience, wanting to serve God. You need not share their religion to honor the truth about the history of the Pilgrims. But there's no getting around. What they did was really complicated. The Pilgrims were seeking one thing. They just wanted freedom. And what was unusual is they really wanted to have a government under God. That was what they wanted, and a government under God, a theocracy. This single inspiration, Adams called it, they got their freedom because they were willing to struggle for it. But they didn't get their theocracy because it was incompatible with their freedom. They had to create a covenant between them, and that they would have a system of rules and laws, and there would be enough God-fearing people, as 70 million of you are right now, to maintain stability and self-control and be able to abide by a law that is higher than the law of just savage dominance over others. And that social contract, that agreement, allowed them to have religious freedom and a system where those that weren't religious could participate and prosper. In making the case for the Pilgrim Fathers, got my sprinklers taken off here now. You wonder what that noise is. The Pilgrim Fathers, they did this because they had that Mayflower Covenant. It was their compact. And second, they were able to build institutions that would work. At first, they tried to live, get this, they tried to live as communists and socialists, where everybody shared everything in common. And but that didn't work, because it never works that way. There's always some that are going to have 10 talents, 5 talents, 1 talent. And so they abandoned the utopian experiment in order to revert to private property, responsibility, support for each other, and the building of a community. That's a pretty powerful second reason they survived. And third, they survived because they treated the natives with Christian decency and respect. And that lasted, I think, until 1670, when another generation came along that knew not Joseph, and they went back to the Native Americans, and the settlers had this rough history. But I want you to have that information, because I do think that the covenant that we're in right now, for those of you that are watching from other nations, we're so thankful for you praying for us. One of the most moving articles that I read, letters I read, was from a communist China underground church leader who is in the suffering church. He said, we're praying for America. We want America to stay strong, because America has always gone from its revolution to the Civil War to World War II to right now. Your existence is a restraint upon the devil in the world. Imagine this is an underground church leader writing to America. Stay strong, because they're praying for America, and they're praying for us right now. So there's your update from the defense secretary being fired, the counterterrorism soldier being put in his place, Trump preparing so that he could deal and quell anarchy in the event that he gets his Hail Marys through. And all of those Hail Marys are really is justice being served in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and I'm not even including Arizona. That's just bonus bucks. And it's our system that has to stay strong. So I want you guys to be encouraged on this. I want you to share this, please, with other people. If you haven't got the book, God's Chaos Code, you need to get it, because I'm already getting heat, as I should, because of my predictions in there. And what's weird is Christians are the ones that are sometimes the weirdos, because I'm saying how that Donald Trump is a Cyrus, and the model of the Old Testament actually tells us how the end-time plan works out, that God will raise up secular rulers, which will have strong believers that will rise up, and that by raising up a Cyrus-type secular leader in government and a strong apostolic prophetic church, that is not just existing for its own sake. And we really have to break this model in America. We're so weak because we still have local church instead of apostolic church. Apostolic church is a church for the nation. It's a church that owns the Justice Department to make sure it's just, that owns economics to make sure that nobody is robbed of provision or opportunity. It's education to make sure that people aren't going to be poisoned in their mind and turn toxic and hateful. And so the church has to be an apostolic church in order, like with the Pilgrims, to have enough of a quorum of those that love God and fear God so that those that don't love God and fear God can abide by a contract. And the left, as you can see, would just prefer to undo this whole thing and make you shut up and submit and shelter in place and give up your property and be part of their version of utopia, which has never worked anywhere. And it wouldn't work in China if America wasn't selling out all of its jobs and all of its people in order to make China prosperous. And Donald Trump has screwed that game up. So share this, be encouraged, and know that these margins that we're watching the Lord shave down that thing. And it's going to require patience and prayer, but continue to listen to sources like this, broadcasts like this, and we're working our way around the media mouth of the false prophets, because that's what they are. They're a false prophet on the media mountain and an antichrist spirit trying to get control of government. And it will not succeed, because this is not the time for that. In the name of Yeshua. Thanks for being with me, all 3,900 of you. God bless you. Be strong and of good courage. Father, we pray right now that the president will be surrounded by protection, and that you're going to cause the lawyers to have angels that are going to guide them, the police, the investigating teams, that there's going to be evidence that's going to continue to be revealed. Isaiah 45, thus says the Lord to Cyrus, you're going to make the crooked places straight and the rough places smooth, and you're going to reveal the treasures that are buried and hidden in darkness, and you're going to do this for the sake of your people and for Israel. And you're doing it because, as Isaiah said, verily you're a God who hides himself. And so the Lord is toughening us up. He's maturing us. He's teaching us how to be engaged. And we're not done yet. There's a populist movement rising. There's going to be places you have to show up. You're going to have to go physically to show up. You're going to have to continue to be strong and be present and not let the enemy steal what doesn't belong to him. And this populist movement is going to be a Christian. I believe it's going to be a nationalist movement, which is going to push back on the elites. There'll be a backlash, and there'll be a resolve to deal with this thing. And we're going to see truth prevail, and we're going to ask the Lord to cause the searchlights of heaven to come down and to do the impossible and expose the hidden works of darkness, and let righteousness expand our peace long enough so that we can do the work globally that we have to do. Mike Pompeo, I believe, is the man who's going to be heading up something for the sheep nations arising. The world won't call it that. That's the biblical language. It's going to be sovereign, independent nations and freedom from religious persecution. But you watch, we're going to be aligning with that work and unashamed about it. And I really don't care what the left thinks about it. We're just going to have to do it because there's 1 billion Christians out there in the world, and there are other nations praying, and they don't want to suffer. Right now with the COVID, impact globally, we have a tremendous economic challenge. We're not even talking about it. 140% debt over GDP in the United States right now. We are we've this runaway crazy Washington spending has got us trillions of dollars over our heads in debt, and it would be if Trump is in, we can have that gradual strength of recovery. I don't have to tell you if he isn't. You'll see the big five, the Amazons, and all the big tech stocks. They're going to be judged pretty quickly. I think they're going to be, and then you're going to see the NASDAQ go down, and we cannot see that. Not now. Not now, in Jesus' name. It's not God's plan, but I just want you to know we're fighting for a bigger, more complex game than most Christians think, that your prayers are targeting if you're praying from the right heart. Keep praying. Amen. Share this.
If you like this video, make sure you like it here and also subscribe so that you can get other broadcasts in the future as soon as they come out. And you know what would help me? Make a comment and give me your thoughts on what you'd like to hear about in the future.